The most terrifying moment of my marriage didn't happen when my wife left. It didn't happen during an argument. And it didn't happen on graduation day. It happened 3 seconds after she looked me in the eyes and said 4 words. 4 simple words that should have made me happy. Words I had dreamed of hearing for 7 years. Words I had sacrificed everything for. But when Jasmine said them, something felt wrong. Terribly wrong. Because the look in her eyes didn't match the words coming out of her mouth. And after 7 years together, I knew exactly when Jasmine was hiding something. After all, my wife was only days away from graduating from medical school. The biggest moment of her life. The dream we had spent years fighting for. The dream that had cost us almost everything. What I didn't know was that the worst day of my life was already approaching. Slowly, quietly. But to understand how everything fell apart, you first need to understand how it all began. Back when Jasmine wasn't Dr. Jasmine. Back when we were just 2 broke people sharing one impossible dream in a tiny Florida apartment. 7 years earlier, my life looked nothing like it does today. I was 28 years old and working at a distribution warehouse outside Jacksonville. The work wasn't glamorous. Most days started before sunrise and ended after dark. I loaded trucks, moved inventory, handled paperwork, and spent 10 hours a day on concrete floors that left my back aching every night. The pay wasn't terrible, but it wasn't enough to make anyone rich. Still, I was proud of what I did. My parents raised me to believe that honest work deserved respect. As long as I could pay my bills and sleep peacefully at night, I considered myself successful. At the time, I had no idea how much my life was about to change. I met Jasmine on a rainy Thursday evening. A friend convinced me to stop by a small diner after work. I almost didn't go. I was exhausted. My clothes smelled like warehouse dust. And all I wanted was a shower and a bed. Fortunately, my friend refused to take no for an answer. That decision changed everything. The diner wasn't crowded, Karma. A few customers occupied booths near the windows. Soft music played through old speakers. And behind the counter stood a young woman arguing with a customer. Not rudely. Firmly. The customer had been insulting one of the waitresses. Most people ignored it. Jasmine didn't. She stood her ground. Professional. Confident. Fearless. The customer eventually left. The waitress thanked her, and Jasmine simply smiled before returning to work. I couldn't stop watching. My friend noticed immediately. "You like her?" I laughed. "I don't even know her." "That hasn't stopped you from staring." I tried denying it. Failed miserably. An hour later, I finally gathered enough courage to introduce myself. To my surprise, she wasn't impressed. Not by my jokes. Not by my confidence. Not by anything. She challenged everything I said. Questioned every opinion. And somehow made me laugh more than anyone I'd met in years. We talked until the restaurant closed. Then continued talking outside. Then talked again the following day. And the day after that. Before long, I found myself looking forward to every conversation. Every text message. Every excuse to see her. For the first time in a long time, the future felt exciting. 6 months later, we were inseparable. A year later, we were married. Life wasn't easy. Our first apartment was tiny. The air conditioning barely worked. The kitchen was so small that only one person could cook comfortably. And our furniture came from thrift stores and garage sales. But we were happy. Genuinely happy. Some of my favorite memories come from those years. Watching movies on a second-hand couch. Sharing takeout because we couldn't afford anything else. Talking about our dreams late at night. Believing we could accomplish anything together. Jasmine's dream was always medicine. Even before I met her. Even before we got married. She carried medical textbooks everywhere. Spent weekends studying. Watched lectures online. Read articles while eating dinner. Her determination amazed me. One night we sat on our apartment balcony watching the sunset. She looked unusually quiet. I knew something was bothering her. "What is it?" I asked. She hesitated, then sighed. "I think I'm scared." "Of what?" She stared toward the horizon. "What if I never become a doctor?" I didn't answer immediately. She continued speaking. "Every year thousands of students apply." "I know." "What if I'm not good enough?" I turned toward her. "You're one of the smartest people I've ever met." She laughed softly. "Being smart isn't enough." "Maybe not." "Then what is?" I smiled, refusing to quit. For several seconds she said nothing. Then she leaned against my shoulder. You really believe I can do this? The answer came instantly. Absolutely. That wasn't encouragement. It was the truth. I believed in her completely. Sometimes more than she believed in herself. Over the next 2 years, that dream became the center of our lives. Everything revolved around it. Work schedules, finances, vacations, decisions, plans. Every choice pointed toward one goal: getting Jasmine into medical school. The application process was brutal. Entrance exams, interviews, essays, recommendations, months of uncertainty, months of stress. Karma, months of waiting. Karma. There were moments when she wanted to give up, moments when rejection felt inevitable, moments when fear overwhelmed her confidence. Whenever that happened, I reminded her why she started. I reminded her who she was. And little by little she kept moving forward. Then one afternoon everything changed. I was at work unloading a shipment when my phone vibrated. A text message. From Jasmine. Only 3 words. Call me now. My heart nearly stopped. I immediately stepped outside and dialed her number. She answered on the first ring. And before I could speak, I heard her crying. For one terrifying second, I thought something terrible had happened. Then she finally managed to say the words, Brandon. I got in. Everything around me disappeared. The noise, the trucks, the warehouse. The people. Nothing existed except those 3 words. She got in. Against the odds. Against the competition. Against every fear she had carried for years. She got in. Neither of us knew that moment would become the beginning of the greatest achievement of her life. And the beginning of the greatest mistake of mine. The acceptance letter changed everything. For the first few weeks, life felt like a celebration. Jasmine carried the letter everywhere. She showed it to family members, friends, co-workers, even strangers whenever the conversation drifted toward education. I couldn't blame her. She had worked for years to earn that opportunity, and I was proud of her, more proud than I had ever been of anything in my life. The first semester began 2 months later. That's when reality arrived. Medical school wasn't just expensive. It was brutally expensive. Tuition alone made my stomach hurt. Then came books, lab fees, equipment, transportation, housing expenses, insurance. Every month seemed to introduce another unexpected cost. One evening, Jasmine sat at our kitchen table surrounded by paperwork. I could see panic growing on her face. She stared at the numbers, then looked at me, then back at the numbers. This can't be right. I sat beside her. What happened? She pushed the papers toward me. I reviewed them quietly. The amount due was staggering. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, Jasmine shook her head. I can't do this. Yes, you can. No, Brandon. Her eyes filled with tears. We don't have this kind of money. I remained calm. We'll figure it out. She laughed bitterly. How? I didn't have an answer. Not yet. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let her dream die because of money. The following week, I volunteered for every overtime shift available. Then I took weekend shifts. Then I accepted night assignments. Before long, I was working more than 70 hours a week. Sometimes 80. I left home before sunrise, returned after dark, ate meals in my truck, slept less than I should have, and repeated the process again the next day. It wasn't sustainable, but every time exhaustion threatened to break me, I remembered why I was doing it. I wasn't buying luxury. I wasn't chasing status. I was helping the woman I loved become the person she was meant to be. That belief carried me through countless difficult days. At first, Jasmine appreciated everything. She thanked me constantly. Sometimes she cried when she saw how hard I was working. One night she waited for me to come home. I walked through the apartment door shortly after midnight. She was sitting on the couch holding 2 plates of food. You should be asleep. She shook her head. You should be resting. I smiled. Tough day? Tough week. We sat together eating reheated pasta. Then she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I'll never forget this. What? Everything you're doing for me. I shrugged. That's what husbands do. No. Her voice became emotional. Not like this. I still remember those words. Because years later, I would wonder what happened to the woman who said them. The semesters passed quickly. The financial pressure never disappeared. If anything, it became worse. Medical school consumed every aspect of our lives. Vacations disappeared. Date nights disappeared. Spontaneous weekends disappeared. Everything became school. Everything became survival. I didn't complain, at least not publicly. But privately, there were nights when I sat alone in my truck wondering how much longer I could maintain that pace. My savings account slowly vanished. Then my emergency fund disappeared. Eventually, I sold several investments I had spent years building. The money went directly toward tuition. Jasmine protested at first. I refused to listen. We can rebuild savings later. What about your plans? My plans can wait. You always say that, because it's true. She looked away. And for a brief moment, I thought I saw guilt in her eyes. The next morning, she left before dawn for class. I left before dawn for work. That became our routine. Weeks blended together. Months blended together. Years blended together. Then something began changing. At first it was subtle, almost invisible, the kind of thing most people would overlook. Jasmine started spending more time with classmates. That made sense. They studied together, worked together, prepared for exams together. I encouraged it. Medical school was demanding. She needed support. But eventually the conversations changed. She began talking about people I had never met. Future surgeons, future specialists, future doctors. Every story involved classmates from medical school. Every discussion involved professors. Every event involved people from her new world. Meanwhile, my world remained exactly the same. Warehouse shifts, overtime, bills, responsibilities. I didn't realize it then, but a gap was beginning to form. Slowly, quietly. One conversation at a time. One semester at a time. One success at a time. The first moment that truly bothered me happened during a dinner party. A group of her classmates had gathered after final exams. Most of them arrived with partners. Doctors, residents, medical students, healthcare professionals. I immediately felt out of place. Still, I attended because Jasmine wanted me there. At least I thought she did. The evening started normally. Then one of her classmates asked what I did for a living. Warehouse operations. The answer was simple. Honest. Nothing to be embarrassed about. Yet before I could say another word, Jasmine jumped into the conversation. He works a lot. Something about her tone felt strange. Dismissive. Almost apologetic. The classmate nodded politely. Then returned to discussing medicine with everyone else. The moment lasted only seconds, but it stayed with me all night. On the drive home, I finally asked, "Did something happen?" "What do you mean?" "At dinner." She frowned. "What about dinner?" "You seemed uncomfortable." Her eyes remained fixed on the road ahead. "You're imagining things." Maybe she was right. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I was insecure. So I dropped the subject. Months later, something similar happened again. And again. And again. Each incident was small, harmless on its own. But together they created a pattern. Jasmine became less interested in our conversations, less interested in our plans, less interested in our future. Instead, she focused on residency programs, career opportunities, professional networking, prestige, recognition. Titles, achievements. I told myself this was normal. Successful people became ambitious. Ambitious people became focused. Focused people became distracted. Nothing unusual. Nothing dangerous. At least that's what I wanted to believe. Then came the phone call. I answered during my lunch break. Jasmine sounded excited. I finished at the top of my class. I smiled immediately. "That's amazing. It really is." I could hear celebration in her voice. Pure excitement. For a moment everything felt like old times. Then she said something that caught my attention. I knew I'd make it. The statement wasn't unusual. The confidence wasn't unusual. What bothered me was what she didn't say. She didn't say we. She didn't mention our sacrifices. She didn't mention the years of support. She didn't mention anything beyond herself. Just one sentence. I knew I'd make it. Again, I ignored the feeling. Again, I chose optimism. Again, I convinced myself I was overthinking. Because love often makes people blind, especially when they desperately want to believe everything is fine. By the beginning of her final year, Jasmine looked completely different. Not physically, professionally, emotionally. Socially, she carried herself differently. spoke differently, thought differently. People admired her. Professors praised her. Hospital administrators noticed her. Opportunities appeared everywhere. And with every new success, the distance between us seemed to grow. The hardest part wasn't the money. It wasn't the overtime. It wasn't the debt. The hardest part was realizing that the closer Jasmine moved toward her dream, the further she seemed to move away from me. And despite seeing the warning signs, despite feeling the shift happening in real time, I continued telling myself the same lie. Everything would be better after graduation. Everything would be worth it after graduation. Everything would finally make sense after graduation. I had no idea how wrong I was. Graduation day arrived faster than I expected. For years, I had imagined what that day would feel like. I pictured Jasmine crossing the stage. I pictured us celebrating with family. I pictured taking photographs that we would eventually show our children. Most of all, I pictured relief. The struggle would finally be over. The debt, the stress, the sacrifices, the endless years of surviving instead of living. Everything would finally lead somewhere. At least that was what I believed. The morning began before sunrise. I barely slept the night before. Not because I was nervous, because I was excited. Genuinely excited. I woke up before my alarm and spent several minutes staring at the ceiling. A smile slowly formed across my face. We made it. After everything, we actually made it. I got dressed carefully, pressed my suit, polished my shoes, double-checked the gift box, then picked up the bouquet of white roses I had ordered days earlier. The flowers weren't expensive, but they were perfect. Jasmine loved white roses. Always had. As I drove toward the university campus, memories flooded my mind. The first time we met, our first apartment, late-night study sessions, the countless hours of overtime. Every sacrifice suddenly felt worth it. I arrived early. Families were already gathering outside the graduation arena. Parents carried cameras. Children ran between groups of graduates. Laughter echoed through the crowd. The atmosphere felt hopeful. Beautiful. Like the beginning of a new chapter. I found my seat and waited. Soon the ceremony began. One by one, students crossed the stage. Professors applauded. Families cheered. The excitement was contagious. Then Jasmine's name was called. The audience erupted. I stood immediately, clapping harder than anyone around me. My chest swelled with pride. There she was. Confident. Elegant. Successful. The woman I had spent years supporting. The woman I loved. The woman I believed would spend the rest of her life beside me. For a brief moment, our eyes met. I smiled. She nodded, then continued walking. Something about the interaction felt strange, but I ignored it. I had become very good at ignoring uncomfortable feelings. The ceremony eventually ended. Graduates poured outside. Families rushed toward loved ones. People hugged, celebrated, cried, laughed. I searched the crowd until I finally spotted Jasmine. She stood with several classmates. Most of them were taking photographs. I walked toward her carrying the flowers and gift. My heart raced. Not from fear, from happiness. This was our moment, or at least I thought it was. When Jasmine noticed me approaching, her expression changed. The smile disappeared. Not completely, just enough for me to notice. My footsteps slowed. Something felt off. Again. The same feeling I had experienced for months. The same feeling I kept dismissing. The same feeling I kept refusing to acknowledge. I finally reached her. Congratulations. I held out the flowers. For a second she stared at them, then accepted them without enthusiasm. No hug. No kiss. No excitement. Just a polite nod. Thank you. The response felt strangely formal, like she was speaking to a colleague, not her husband. I forced a smile. I brought something for you. I handed her the gift box. She looked at it briefly, then placed it beside the flowers. Still no real reaction. Confusion began replacing excitement. Before I could speak again, Jasmine glanced toward a group standing several feet away. A man in a dark suit stepped forward. At first I assumed he was a professor, maybe a university administrator. Then I noticed the folder in his hand. My stomach tightened. The man stopped beside Jasmine. Neither of them spoke. For several seconds the three of us simply stood there. Then Jasmine took a slow breath. The look on her face immediately told me something was wrong. Terribly wrong. Brandon. The way she said my name made my heart sink. No wife should sound that distant. No wife should sound that cold. What is it? She hesitated, then reached toward the folder. The next few seconds felt unreal, like a dream, like a nightmare, like something happening to someone else. She removed several papers, handed them to me, and everything changed. I stared at the documents. The words blurred together. At first, my brain refused to process them. Then reality crashed into me. Divorce papers. My hands began shaking. The crowd around us suddenly disappeared. The noise disappeared. The celebration disappeared. Everything disappeared, except those papers, and the woman standing in front of me. The woman I barely recognized. I looked up slowly, certain there had been a mistake. Certain there was another explanation. There wasn't. Her expression confirmed it. This was real, every second of it. I don't understand. My voice sounded weak, broken. Jasmine crossed her arms. We've grown apart. The sentence hit harder than any punch. After everything. After 7 years. After every sacrifice. That was all she had to say. We've grown apart. I searched her face desperately, looking for emotion, regret, anything. Instead, I found certainty. She had already made peace with this decision. Long before today. Long before this conversation. Long before I even suspected something was wrong. When? The question escaped before I could stop it. When what? When did you decide this? She looked away. That answer told me everything. It hadn't happened recently. It had been planned. Carefully. Quietly. Possibly for months. The realization shattered something inside me. The attorney finally stepped forward. Professional. Emotionless. Prepared. Exactly like Jasmine. I recommend reviewing the documents with counsel. I barely heard him. My attention remained fixed on my wife, or perhaps my former wife. I wasn't sure anymore. The woman standing before me looked familiar, yet somehow completely different, as though success had transformed her into someone else. Someone who no longer remembered where she came from. Someone who no longer remembered who helped her get there. Around us, people continued celebrating. Some noticed the tension. Some whispered. Others pretended not to look. Humiliation burned through me. But strangely, anger never arrived. Not immediately. Only sadness. Overwhelming sadness. I lowered the papers. What happened to us? For the first time, Jasmine looked uncomfortable. The expression lasted less than a second. Then it vanished. We want different things. Again with the word we, as though I had participated in this decision, as though I had agreed. I nodded slowly. Not because I accepted it, because I understood there was nothing left to say. The decision had already been made. The conversation was merely a formality, a notification, an announcement, an ending. Jasmine adjusted the flowers in her arm, the flowers I had brought to celebrate her success. Then she turned away and walked toward her future, leaving me standing alone in the middle of a graduation celebration that suddenly felt like a funeral. For a long time I didn't move. I simply stood there, watching her disappear into the crowd, watching 7 years of marriage disappear with her, watching the future I had imagined collapse in real time. Eventually people stopped staring. The celebration continued. Life moved forward, as life always does. Mine, however, felt frozen. The following months became the darkest period of my life. I moved into a small apartment, sold belongings, reduced expenses, worked even more hours. Not because I wanted to, because I had no choice. The debt remained. The bills remained. The consequences remained. Only Jasmine was gone. Every room felt empty. Every evening felt longer. Every memory felt painful. There were moments when I questioned everything. My judgment, my decisions, my sacrifices, my worth. Had I been foolish? Naive? Weak? The questions haunted me, but eventually something unexpected happened. The pain stopped controlling every thought, then every day, then every decision. Little by little, I began rebuilding. I started reading again, learning again, planning again. For the first time in years, I focused on my own future, not someone else's. Mine. And that decision would change everything. I was unknowingly taking the first steps toward a future neither of us could have imagined. The first year after the divorce nearly broke me, not because Jasmine left, not because of the humiliation at graduation, not even because of the debt. It was because for the first time in 7 years I had no purpose. For years, every decision I made revolved around Jasmine's dream. Every overtime shift, Every sacrifice, every financial struggle, everything had a destination. Then suddenly that destination disappeared, and I was left standing alone with a future I had never planned for. The apartment felt empty. The silence felt heavier than any workload I had ever carried. Some nights I sat on the edge of my bed staring at the wall for hours, wondering how everything had fallen apart so quickly, wondering if I had missed signs, wondering if I had wasted 7 years of my life. The thoughts were dangerous, because self-pity can become addictive. It can convince you that your story is over, that your best years are behind you. One evening I caught myself doing exactly that. I was sitting alone in my apartment when I looked at a framed photograph from our wedding. For several minutes I stared at it. Then I stood up and threw it away. Not because I hated Jasmine, not because I was angry, because I finally understood something. I couldn't build a future while living inside the past. That night changed everything. The next morning I created a notebook. On the first page I wrote 4 words. Build your own dream. Those 4 words became my mission. I stopped focusing on what I had lost. I started focusing on what I could still become. Every day after work I studied business, leadership, finance, supply chains, logistics, anything that could help me grow. The process wasn't exciting. Most nights I was exhausted. Most mornings I wanted to quit. But I kept going, one day at a time, one lesson at a time, one improvement at a time. Months turned into years. Slowly, opportunities appeared. Then more opportunities. Then even bigger ones. Eventually I launched my own logistics consulting company. At first it was just me. One laptop, one client, one tiny office. Nothing glamorous. But it was mine. And for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't experienced since before medical school. Hope. Real hope. The company grew faster than I expected. Clients recommended me. Contracts increased. Within 5 years I had built a business that employed dozens of people. The success felt incredible. Not because of the money. Because nobody had handed it to me. Nobody had sacrificed for me. Nobody had rescued me. I built it myself. One decision at a time. One difficult day at a time. One setback at a time. The confidence that comes from that kind of growth is impossible to describe. Then one afternoon everything came full circle. I attended a healthcare conference in Orlando. My company had recently partnered with several medical suppliers. The event seemed routine, nothing special. Until I saw Jasmine. She was standing near a conference booth speaking with several doctors. For a moment I wasn't sure it was really her. 5 years had passed. But eventually she turned, and our eyes met. The shock on her face was immediate. "Brandon," I smiled politely. "Hi, Jasmine." For several seconds she couldn't speak. Her eyes moved to my conference badge, then back to me. "You own Nkunga Logistics?" "I do." The realization visibly hit her, not because I was successful, because I wasn't supposed to be. At least not according to the version of me she had left behind. We spoke briefly. Then she asked if we could sit somewhere and talk. Part of me wanted to say no. Another part realized I no longer had a reason to avoid the conversation. The pain was gone. The resentment was gone. So, I agreed. We found a quiet table overlooking a small lake behind the conference center. For several moments neither of us spoke. Then Jasmine finally broke the silence. "I'm sorry." The words sounded genuine. Not rehearsed, not strategic. Genuine. "I treated you terribly." I remained silent. She continued. "I spent years convincing myself that success made me better than the people around me." Tears appeared in her eyes. And I was wrong. For the first time since graduation I saw regret. Real regret. Not because my life turned out well. Because she finally understood her choices. She lowered her head. "You were the one person who never stopped believing in me." The words hung between us. Karma. Painful. Honest. True. I took a slow breath. "I believed in you because I loved you." She nodded. More tears appeared. "I know." Then she said something that surprised me. "Leaving you was the biggest mistake of my life." 5 years earlier I had imagined hearing those words. Back then they would have meant everything. Now they meant almost nothing. Not because I hated her. Because I had healed. The version of me that needed validation from Jasmine no longer existed. I smiled softly. I hope you find happiness. Her eyes widened slightly. That wasn't the response she expected. Maybe she expected anger. Maybe she expected bitterness. Maybe she expected revenge. Instead, she received peace. Because peace is what happens when someone no longer controls your emotions. We talked for another hour, then eventually stood to leave. No dramatic ending. No reconciliation. No second chance. Just two people walking in different directions. As I returned to my hotel, I thought about the younger version of myself. The man standing at graduation holding flowers. The man whose heart had just been shattered. If I could speak to him, I would tell him something important. Never lose yourself while helping someone else chase their dream. Love should be a partnership, not a sacrifice of one life for another. Support people. Believe in people. Help people grow, but never forget to grow alongside them. Because the greatest success in life isn't becoming rich. It's becoming strong enough to rebuild after losing everything. And wise enough to do it without becoming bitter.